Today, we are going to talk about the role of financial distress in aviation sector. I have with me Dr. Ruchi Mehrotra, PhD in Finance, Associate Professor at CCE UPES, and Dr. Bharat Ankur Dogra, PhD in Aerospace Engineering, who is working as Assistant Professor at CCE UPES in the Aviation Management Department. Global airlines projected a sharp reduction in industry losses next year as a multi-speed recovery from the coronavirus crisis is underway, but revised up the financial toll inflicted by the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. The International Air Transport Association, the industry's main trade body, predicted that net losses at airlines would narrow to $11.6 billion in 2022 from $51.8 billion this year. The losses for 2021 were revised up from $47.7 billion estimated in April. ITA also revised up losses for 2020 to $137.7 billion from $126.4 billion estimated earlier. We have seen aviation industry going through losses and crisis in the last few years. So, let's ask our panelists how and what are the latest trends in the industry due to this financial distress. First, I would like to ask Dr. Ruchi, how do we define financial distress?
Thank you, Bhavika, for this question. To start with, financial distress is basically a situation where a company is heading towards bankruptcy or insolvency. It is primarily a condition where a company is not able to generate sufficient revenues, sufficient profits, and it's primarily not able to repay for the debt obligations a company is having. So, when we look at aviation as a particular industry to mention, we've seen that there are investments which are highly capital investments. It is a capital intensive industry, and there are illiquid assets and revenues which actually face a lot due to the economic downturns. We have seen that financial distress is not only very pervasive in the last few years due to pandemic, but primarily aviation sector has suffered a lot due to various geopolitical situations, crude oil crisis, certain regional wars happening, and we have also seen that a lot of siphoning of funds and certain financial problems which have been there with aviation sector, that has actually been one of the primary reasons of crisis in this industry. So, financial distress we actually look at from three financial statements: balance sheet, which is our fund flow statement, we have income expenditure statement, which is our profit and loss, and cash flow. So, looking at all these three financial statements, we find that first of all decreasing profits, then the cash flow not being persistent in an aviation sector, which has been the primary reason of crisis for companies like Kingfisher, Deccan Airlines. We have even seen Jet Airways going through the similar problems. Also, we have seen another big problem of rising liabilities, especially raising of debt in vicious circle. So, you take one particular, it's like a domino effect. So, in a domino effect, what happens? You take one loan, try to repay the earlier liabilities, then you take another loan. So, it becomes a vicious circle of debt wherein an aviation company actually gets debt trap. Already being capital intensive, yes, this creates a much bigger problem, much larger context, the problem rises. So, it actually leads over a period of time towards financial distress, leading to insolvency and bankruptcy. So, that is what is financial distress.
Thank you, Dr. Ruchi. Moving on, Dr. Bharat, how would you relate this to aviation sector?
As we all know, after pandemic again, now the aviation sector is on growth. From certain data is available on over the aviation sector or over the internet, they say like 15% increase or growth is already there, and government is also backed this up with some extensive airport infrastructure development. So, airline companies in India, they periodically face financial distress as the internal and your external environmental factors, they change dynamically. So, now these internal and external factors, these internal factors are related to your regulatory compliance, your rising cost, your huge capital investment, and there are certain rising debts also, and if we talk about the external factors, so they are like crude oil or regulatory or compliance and so on. So, these companies must ensure that the distress condition does not develop into the bankruptcy, right. So, it needs to identify all those factors which have a major impact on the company's financial condition and monitor them continuously using various tools and techniques. And you mentioned about Kingfisher and so on, and there are certain historical cases available there, like Kingfisher, like Jet Airways, and so on. So, we can talk on that sector, those sectors, those organizations like Jet Airways and all related to this financial distress. That's my point.
I agree. So, Dr. Ruchi, as Dr. Bharat mentioned about Kingfisher and the financial problems that they went through, could you please help us with more information on that?
Yeah. So, Kingfisher is a very interesting case to study in financial distress. Kingfisher Airlines was actually owned by the biggest liquor tycoon of India, and with an ambition to actually become the industry leader in the aviation sector. So, they wanted to grow share in the aviation market, and they wanted to have more number of destinations, numerous awards. They depicted a very attractive and innovative picture for the company. But what happened was, Kingfisher Airlines, they achieved success in gaining customer satisfaction by offering various incentives, various interesting travel plans, but the flying experience was also very great. But the problem happened with the internal financial cash flow management of the company. So, Kingfisher Airlines had a very short but a very lasting impression, I would say, first of all, to appreciate that. But at the end of 2011, though the company was not even a profit making enterprise, but it got a listing there in the stock exchange. This was quite a surprising fact coming in the year 2008 and 9. I remember the listing happened. And that was the time wherein we were looking at the global financial recession of 2008. Then also there was another very interesting thing, a consortium of banks, which was a public sector and private sector banks coming in together. The consortium was led by State Bank of India, and this particular business enterprise, Kingfisher, being a part of UB Holdings, which is United Breweries as a company. So, the company actually got listing, and parallelly another problem started was with the huge debt circle where they were getting trapped into. So, this SBI was the first banker, the consortium leader, and they did the funding for this particular company in context of having a secured lending. This particular secured lending was a lending against a collateral which was an intangible asset. Now, this is quite a very surprising thing happening in the entire banking financial history of India. So, this was for the first time happening in the Indian financial banking sector, that a lending which is a collateral lending against an intangible asset. Now, against an intangible asset, if you find, the problem was only with the brand, and the brand was actually kept as a collateral. So, this actually created a very big problem amongst the entire industry as a whole, because this was the first time happening, and the entire capital intensive assets, which is the fleet size, a big machinery tool, plant machinery equipments, they were not kept as mortgage. So, a loan amounting to somewhere around 7,000 crores was an enormous amount for the banks to suffer the losses. So, this actually brought in a big particular change both for the banking sector as well as a particular aviation sector as a whole. But there were many other particular problems internally happening to the company, which was Kingfisher. The company had a big problem of siphoning of funds, and diversion of funds actually took place when these loans were taken. So, when the company was actually run by Vijay Mallya, and then finally latest we know that extradition and so many other particular issues are coming up from the NCLT, which is National Company Law Tribunal. But we have really seen, but at that point in time, the banks were persuading the company for the repayment of debt obligations. These debt obligations were not being paid, and after a 90-day period, when a debt is not repaid, a company is classified to be a NPA, which is a non-performing asset. So, this non-performing asset for a company like Kingfisher to be declared was first of all a very, because it was a listed company. So, a listed company being declared as a NPA, that was another big problem. So, this problem was very much highlighted by the bankers and they became as whistleblowers. But Kingfisher was not able to revive with this siphoning of funds, multiple other problems, the rising cost and another big problem of low cost airlines also getting into businesses. So, they had severe fears, rather I would say. It was a fierce competition amongst various industry players and finally, they actually lost it, and the migration of the CMD, which is Vijay Mallya, it happened and from the country, and this actually led to another bigger problem of non-repayment of loans, which amounted to almost the double amount of 7,000 crores of loan. So, that was about Kingfisher.
Right. So, Dr. Bharat, what were the problems in Jet Airways? I mean, could you please help us know the exact series of events that happened?
Backed up to Dr. Ruchi, like she mentioned about Kingfisher. Now, Jet Airways also in that distress, financial distress. So, there are certain series of events. So, what exactly happened is, like many aviation experts, they believe these jets financial problems, they began with the $500 million cash crunch or the cash purchase of Air Sahara, that is in 2006. So, the founder, the Naresh Goyal, he allegedly ignored the advice of professional associates who said that he was paying too much to them. So, the market's reaction to that transaction, it was also decidedly as a mix. So, the budget carrier was rebranded as a Jetlight, but it lost money and it went bankrupt in 2015. So, if I go further, there is certain more points related to this. Like if we talk about the budget airlines, like India's aviation sector, which is fiercely competitive, and you know, Jet has taken a battering from a number of hugely successful low cost airlines, including your Indigo, your SpiceJet, your Go Air. So, simply put it like this, like they spent more than they earned and they kept on accruing their debts, right. So, his decision to have a single management team headed by himself only and running all Jet's operations, it was a crucial mistake, right. If we talk about as an analyst, so he should had one team running the full service carrier and another running the budget flyer, right. So, Jet lacked a concrete business model and fiddled with it often, right. So, all of this India's carriers they are particularly sensitive to these fluctuations in your global crude prices, right. And because the Asian giant, it is a major importer of oil. So, when the rupee is weak, which it has often been over the past year or so, the fuel, the biggest cost burden of our airlines, this fuel. So, it becomes more expensive, right. This soaring oil costs and the Indian rupees, they hitting record lows last year also and affected all Indian carriers. So, this failure to find a strategic investor is also, if I talk about the investors, and there is one more most important point in this financial distress or the failure of this Jet Airways is like the Naresh Goyal, he's not able to, or he was not able to find the strategic investor to pump up money into this Jet Airways. So those strategic investors who pump up money into the Jet, they extended the airline losses. So this factor extended the airline losses. So contributing and also contributing to the financial placement which it finds itself in today. So Jet Airways they are still on losses and it is about, I think, roughly around rupees 1500 crores. So later in early 2019, then Jet stopped its operations and it grounded finally, and in April 2019. So undergoing insolvency and presently proceedings on insolvency and bankruptcy according to your Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016.
Okay. Dr. Ruchi, what would you suggest as a solution to solve the distress in aviation sector?
See, a financial crisis for every business is actually a owner's nightmare, to be very frank. It can be caused due to many internal factors as well as certain external factors, and some are controllable factors and some are non-controllable factors. But these factors can actually weaken up the entire industry, the economy as a whole, and it can probably lead to somewhere what we call it as a state of insolvency, which is like a disaster. So, the internal factors are like poor cash flow management. External factors can be a weakening economy, a global recession, certain calamities, sometimes even natural disasters can also be some of the external factors. But the primary decision is with the management. How do they actually exercise the control mechanism, and how do they control and manage the risk? So, when we talk about risk management, we can say yes, rather than risk control, we can actually talk about risk mitigation. Mitigation is primarily we are trying to reduce the risk. So, there are primarily certain mechanisms which we call it as a recovery mechanism for a company which is going through a financial crisis. So, these recovery strategies are primarily something like retrenchment strategies, which are very common, but not so popular as well, but to a certain extent, yes. Your asset management can be one of these strategies. Retrenchment can not only include, it's more about human or let us say the manpower retrenchment, but it can be inventory control. It can be asset management because it's a highly capital intensive industry. So, to what extent the fleet size is required, how is your order book positions with let us say Airbus or Boeing or whatever. So, and how you are managing your particular oil prices. So, oil prices would not be governed internally, but it is very external factor, but how risk management is done through hedging. So, hedging we all know, again buying derivative positions, so with futures and options, and all airline companies actually persuade in particular stock markets wherein they take positions in crude oil, anticipating with what future prices or particular options position, be it a call option or a put option. So, they try to take certain positions and they manage their oil pricing risk and foreign exchange risk as well. So, these are certain strategies which internally a particular company can obviously follow. In terms of the legal and the regulatory compliances, also companies need to be very strict and particular about it. Why? Because there are certain times wherein penalties are being imposed by regulatories. So, recently we have seen in past about SpiceJet going through certain particular regulatory procedures from DGCA. So, these kinds of measures which internally a company can actually control in should be immediately worked upon. Looking at some of these turnaround strategies which also work very best in any financial crisis is, these are more of revenue oriented. So, in terms of revenue, probably you can change in terms of the product or the service which is being offered. The brand can be renovated. A certain kind of a mechanism can be created wherein more of customers either be it through the pricing or else through any innovative offering which can be done. So, we have seen like lot of people who will preferably go to a certain airline and follow a loyalty factor just due to a kind of service mechanism which they get at their counter. So, some people would prefer to go to always Vistara because of the food and beverage. Some people will go to Indian Airlines only because of the baggage services which they provide on a higher side. So, there are turnaround strategies wherein a company can probably renovate its brand and get more number of loyal customers. So, and that is what is increasing the passenger traffic, increasing the number of revenues, and that is how it can help them in a long run to actually sustain this particular financial distress.
Thank you, Dr. Ruchi. Economic globalization creates wealth, but only for the upper class who benefit from the surge of consolidations, mergers, global scale technology and financial activity. So, Dr. Bharat, what is your say on consolidations and mergers?
So, for these consolidations and mergers, I want to add 5 points related to Tata acquisition on Air India. Tata's winning bid is around rupees 18,000 crores, and Tata already paid a cash payment of rupees 2,700 crores, and Air India, which is and also Air India owed a total of rupees 61,000, approximately 61,000 crores. And second point, there are certain non-core assets owned by Air India, such as buildings, and there are certain non-core assets held by Tata, such as your Delhi housing, etc., etc. Then next point is your non-core assets which are owned by Air India, such as buildings, etc. And there are another non-core assets which are held by Tata. A third is your Air India, that is Air India owed a total of rupees 61,000 crores, and as of August 31, 2021. And a special purpose entity, or you can say the SPV, will receive a transfer of rupees 46,000 crores out of this total, and Tata has settled in the remaining loan. Then comes your non-core assets which are owned by Air India, such as your buildings and land, and they are being used to service rupees 14,000 crores, roughly around 14,000 crores of the total government debt held by the SPV. Then there are certain non-core assets held by Tata again, such as the Delhi housing colony of Vasant Vihar, and the Air India building, and a second Air India building in Mumbai's Nyman Point will be sold off. And if I talk about Air India, so there are certain 6 reasons I want to add up for this financial distress of this of Air India, like less income in passenger revenue. Then we have a low maintenance, or sorry, the low monetization of assets. Then non-availability of proper aircraft is there, or you can say mismanagement in granting bilateral agreements with foreign countries. There are certain loss-making international operations and mismanagement of workforce.
Thank you, Dr. Bharat. So, Dr. Ruchi, can you please help us with some concluding remarks?
Yes, this is actually a very comprehensive statement to make, that yes, follow these strategies and you are out of the financial distress. So, it does not happen the way, because if we look at financial distress, there are a number of internal and external controllable, non-controllable factors. We already talked about it. But then if you look at how a company can actually approach it. So, firstly, identification of the real problem, that is the crucial thing, and a right decision at the right time is very essential. So, find out the causes of financial crisis, buckle it down, remove certain non-essential costs, primarily to look at, being a capital intensive industry, asset wise, which assets have to be gained in the system, which have to be procured, and approaching through a just in time settlement can probably lessen the cost burden, warehousing costs for the companies. Adopting strategies which are hedging strategies in terms of financial risk management can be one of the very fruitful strategies by aviation sector companies. So, companies can follow a asset reduction strategy, which is just in time strategy. They can also use some of these turnaround strategies we discussed before, like looking at where the product or the service line is in an entire product life cycle. So, if they are at a particular maturity stage, they can look in for product renovation, they can look in for product diversification, service diversification, they can do the brand renovation, they can even geographically relocate or maybe add on certain particular further locations, like airline companies they actually do. There is also a budgetary planning which is very important in case of financial distress. So, sometimes change in how your accounting or your budgetary planning is can probably also help. Even the sales strategies, very importantly, how you position your particular brand in the market. So, be it a low cost airline or a luxury airline, or you want to portray in, like some of the airlines, they just want to portray themselves as a low cost airline. So, there is no particular business class in an Indigo airline, but there are particular airlines like Indian right now, Tata, they actually position themselves wherein they have a target segment of both a middle class and luxury class as well. So, how you position your brand and how you want to reposition it, that is also very crucial. And then the primary thing in capital intensive industry is monitoring the cash flows. So, if you have a consistent cash flow, fine, else you need to monitor that and do not fall in a debt trap. That is a very crucial thing to look at for any particular company. So, a domino effect in a debt vicious circle can probably lead to another big crisis, as I already mentioned. But in order for companies to keep themselves reviving, sustaining their particular businesses, very important is a right budgetary plan, and regular monitoring of the cash flows can probably be the key to a successful business enterprise.
Thank you, Dr. Ruchi. Thank you, Dr. Bharat.